Are you interested in buying a business? If so, this is the episode for you. We've had a three-part series with our local business broker, Tanner Noble, and this episode focuses on the business buying process from the perspective of the buyer. It was great, it was actionable, it was educational, and you're going to learn about the entire process in one episode. So enjoy it. I think you're going to like it.
Welcome to the Business Growth Masterclass podcast, where business growth is made simple. Join us as we explore practical strategies for streamlining operations, boosting growth, and creating stable, more valuable companies. We bring you stories from industry leaders, sharing their wins, their losses, and everything in between. Let's go.
Welcome for episode 3 in our three-part series, Tanner Noble.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am excited about this. We wanted to do a business broker series and kind of give an overview of your process from all angles, and this is the third in a three-part series. The first part was, kind of some common misconceptions and common myths around buying and selling businesses. Last week's episode was really going through the process from the seller's perspective. And then this week we wanted to devote an episode going through the entire process from, initially reaching out to a broker to getting to the closing table for a buyer. And so that's what we want to do today, is kind of give a high level overview of that entire process for people that might be interested in buying a business, and of course, dispel some common misconceptions and rules of thumb around that process. And so I guess, starting with that, the first part of that process is getting in touch with you, right?
That's right. Usually what happens is a buyer is Googling, I want to buy a business. And so that's how someone usually gets into it. And they come to this website, Biz Buy Sell. It's like the granddaddy of website marketplaces for businesses. And so from there, there's a listing of businesses that they can find. And when they find one that sounds interesting, they'll click on it. They'll learn more, just high level about it. And then they'll see, a contact the business or whatever kind of form. And so I get a lot of, especially first-time buyers, who that's how they reach me, is they fill out this form on a listing saying that they're interested in learning more about this business. And so from there, well, that's typically for a first-time buyer. Sometimes, I've had multiple time buyers or people who have looked at a bunch of businesses still reach out to me that way, and that way is absolutely fine. The other way is just, somebody calls me up, they see my number and they say, I want to buy a business. Can you help me? And so, basically when I first talk to someone, I'm really trying to get a sense. When I first talk to someone who's a business buyer, I'm trying to get a sense of a couple of different things. One is I want to gauge, what is their financial capability to buy a business? Mm-hmm. So, a lot of buyers, they're going to want to try to hide that. They want to keep the cards close to the chest for many different reasons. Some of them maybe they aren't very financially equipped, and they don't have a bunch of money, and so they want to, don't want to expose that, or maybe they have a bunch of money and they don't want to expose that either because they don't want you to think, they could buy whatever and pay whatever. And so it's kind of a dance, but really what I'm trying to gauge there is, what size business can they afford to buy? Because I don't want to, it's like buying a house, you don't want to go have your eyes are bigger than your stomach.
Yeah.
And you think you can buy a $10 million business, and really you could buy a $100,000 business or vice versa. And so I'm trying to gauge that. I'm trying to gauge what is their relevant experience in owning a business. Have they owned businesses before? Were they successful at that? Have they maybe they haven't owned a business, but they have had this life experience. We've all had life experience. So what is their specific life experience that might lend them towards owning a business, or maybe even just a specific business or in a specific industry, maybe. So those are the kind of two biggest things I'm looking at, but also I'm kind of judging their personality a bit too, because culture in a business is huge, as you both know. It's a big thing, and so you want to have a cultural fit. And so I'm kind of doing a judgmental process to kind of gauge those things with them. And once I've kind of assessed that, and either we've gone through that process or they've found a business on their own. I'm sorry, what I meant by that is we've gone through that process, and then I've helped them identify a business to look at, or they found a business that they want to look at on their own. Then they inquire about it, and I get them to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And this non-disclosure agreement is saying, like, basically they're going to be able to look at the, sort of the details of this business, but they're not going to go share this information with anybody else. And really what that does is it protects the seller, because, they don't want their information blasted all over the city, or, and sometimes they have confidential information. All the time they have confidential information. They just don't want anybody to have that. And so that NDA just helps protect both parties.
Let me jump in real quick.
Okay.
The initial part, I love the illustration of a realtor, that you're pre-qualifying this buyer. You're going through this process of, and we have a buyer questionnaire that we typically, as part of that process, that they're filling out, kind of, telling us a little bit about themselves. What are they interested in? What's the ideal business size on revenue and profit and size and purchase price, and they're kind of pre-populating some of that. But a lot of the initial conversation is like a realtor. Before you're going to go show them, the $1 million mansions down the road, you need to kind of pre-qualify, like, hey, what are we looking to buy, and let's kind of verify that a little bit. When you're looking to buy a house, it's a pre-qualification letter from their lender. In this case, it's that buyer questionnaire and some of the questions that you're trying to discern and get good answers for, so that not only are they not wasting your time and potential sellers' time, but you're ultimately, you're not wasting the buyer's time. And that's an important step in the process. And
Sure.
And I guess before moving on to the NDA, what is your preferred way for people to start that conversation? Is it them getting on Biz Buy Sell, or is it, hey, give me a call and let's walk through, a buyer questionnaire? What's the best way?
Yeah, I think the best way is to just reach out to me and let's talk. Like, I love the process of sort of educating people on how they're going to do this. Like, I just like putting together deals and, making both parties successful. And so just reach out, and I'm happy to talk through that. And like I said, I want to help kind of gather my own high level summary of you and try to help connect you with the best fit. That's part of my role, is to find you a good business to buy.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question, and I think it's along the same lines. If somebody's listening and they're thinking, man, I would love to buy a business, what kind of position do they need to get into financially before they can buy, like, say, I don't know, entry level business, or what the right term would be, but for someone who is a first time business buyer, what kind of financial position do they need to be in?
That's a great question. So, and let me answer that by first saying that, along with your analogy, Albert, earlier about the realtor, like having a pre-qualified letter from a lender when you're buying a house is a huge thing. You need to make sure you can get a loan to buy your house if you don't have the cash. And similarly, in buying a business, it's often very beneficial to go ahead and get pre-qualified with a lender, to help show that you can purchase a business. And so, first of all, I'm happy to also help with that process. Like, we work with a bunch of different SBA lenders, and so me introducing you to them is easy for me, and it's also like I prefer to do it that way because I know who's going to actually help get that process done. There's definitely SBA lenders out there who don't necessarily specialize in business acquisitions, and so we want to get you with the right fit. And so, to answer your question, Kellen, part of that is you have to have the financial history. History is not the right word. What am I trying to? Anyway, you have to be able to have the experience in whatever you're, like I was saying earlier, some kind of experience or some kind of whatever. You have to have financially at least 10% of the sales price.
Okay.
Is the very, very, very minimum. Usually that's not even, you need more than that usually, because you got to have some like working capital, and you got to have, some room to mess up.
Yeah.
So 10% of the purchase price.
10% of the
cash?
purchase price in cash.
Okay.
Or cash equivalent.
And so, we're going to get down, I assume, I know we're going to get down the road to when you actually go, negotiate the business. And part of that will determine how much cash you'll actually need to have. Mm-hmm. But on the very basic level, you got to have at least 10%, because an SBA lender could potentially loan up to 90% of the sales price. So that's best case scenario.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you're looking to buy $1 million business, you need to have at least $100,000 in your bank account, or cash equivalent that you can get a hold of if need be.
Yeah, and then you're also going to have to sign a personal guarantee on that loan. So, if the business doesn't, make cash flow and can't support a debt service payment on that loan, then you're going to have to come out of your pocket to pay for that loan payment. And so you got to have, there's lenders vary all over the map on what that actually looks like, but you got to be able to support that debt service.
Makes sense.
All right.
Hopefully the business does that.
So the buyer, the potential buyer, has reached out to you. You've put together this buyer questionnaire that documents what's the perfect business for them. What does that look like? You've verified they are capable of buying that. And now, they're looking at potential deals. And prior to that, you have them sign a non-disclosure agreement, or an NDA, which is basically protecting the seller from the personal info, the private info, the proprietary info that they may look at the next step. And so what's that next step?
Yeah. So the next step is to get them the marketing material. So as we've talked about, the Biz Buy Sell website, and also I should have mentioned this earlier, but our website, tworld.com, has a bunch of businesses on there too. So on those two websites, there's sort of a high level summary of the business. Once you sign the NDA, you will get access to what we call our confidential information memorandum, or our SIM. Once you see the SIM, it's sort of like a slide deck PDF, and it just has way more details about the business. It has a financial summary snapshot. It has a history of the business. It has strengths and weaknesses of the business, and opportunities, and other things. Like, it has some of them will have pictures of the business, and like maybe an org chart. If the business is big enough, we'll have an org chart of like, here's the employees and what their roles are, and how much they get paid, and all kinds of things like that. And so that is your first real look deep into the business. And from that, you're like, you're making your first of all, your gut feeling, like, is this something that I would want to own? If it passes that test, then it's like, okay, I want to own this business, but can I afford it? Can I, uh, if I do try to buy it, does it make financial sense for me? And then also, like, how do I sort of develop a business plan for what do I want to do with this business once I own it? Because most buyers think sort of like a house flip, like they're going to go in and they're going to change this, and this, and they're going to make it better in some way to be more profitable because of whatever skill set that they're bringing to the table. A lot of the times that may be like advertising. Maybe a business has just been running the same way for years and years and years, and they haven't really needed to advertise because they're just coasting, And a lot of buyers will see that and think, man, if I just throw some advertising dollars at this and build out a marketing system, I could grow the top line just like that. And so things like that, you're trying to figure out when you're going through the sim. You're trying to figure out, is this something I want to buy? And then what would I do with it?
Yeah. The sim is such an important piece of collateral information, whatever, that you're using that. The potential buyer is using that to model out financially, what can I afford? What is the potential? What is the current cash flow? And then given these improvements that we've kind of listed out in this sim of potential opportunities for growth, given if I go do that, this is what the cash flows are going to look like in the future. And so there's a lot of information in this, and it is, your job as a broker to help distill that information and articulate that in a coherent way where people can read the sim and understand the full picture of the business. And, some of them are 4 pages long, some of them are 100 pages long. It kind of varies with the complexity of the business, but I don't think you can overstate like how important that packet is, for the seller, that is as organized and coherent as possible. And then for the buyer, that you can, how to use that information to understand what you can afford, and that understanding, that learning, that's where you come in and help educate potential buyers along the way.
And I would imagine that as an experienced broker, you're helping your clients to look for those red flags in the sim, or maybe that's something you do in the due diligence period. But it's like if I was the first time, maybe this is a bad analogy, but I'm buying a car for the first time, and I'm going on Craigslist. I think the first thing anybody who knows anything about buying a car would say is like, have a mechanic look at that thing because you don't even know what problems might be there. So as a broker, is that something that you do? Are you examining this business with a critical eye on behalf of your buyer and thinking, are there any red flags here? Anything I want to point out to them? And just how do you do that?
Yeah. So I think that, what I'm really trying, when I'm doing that, is when I'm building out the sim, I want to bring to light things that, we don't want to get into an agreement with a buyer and seller and get down the road, and then at the closing table or right before, we find this big red flag.
Yeah.
And it crushes the deal. Like, I don't want that to happen. Nobody wants that to happen. And so those kinds of things I'm trying to uncover before I make the sim. And then there's some of those things that are not necessarily like, bad things. It's a personality fit. Like, I've got examples that are running through my head, but that are confidential. But
you gave one a minute ago. It's like, if I have a business that needs someone to help with marketing, exactly, and this buyer is great with marketing, maybe this is a great match.
But if it needs marketing and the buyer is horrible at marketing or whatever, that's exactly right. And another great example of that is a common misconception from buyers because of the way that business buying has blown up in social media. I mean, TikTok and Instagram, and there's all these gurus that will teach you how to go buy a business. And, they make it seem like this is a passive investment. It's going to give you mailbox money. All you got to do is bring $100,000 to buy $1 million business. And then, you're going to pay that back in 3 years, and the rest is history while you're living on the beach in Cancun. But in reality, those types of businesses are the outliers by far. I mean, most businesses are not passive for an owner. Most of them will require the owner to be, involved to some degree, some heavily involved, some others, maybe 20 hours a week or something like that. But still, it's not something that you're going to be able to, I'm talking for the very vast majority. You're not going to just be sitting on the couch and not doing anything and be able to make a bunch of money.
Yeah. Well, it's like if I'm the owner of that business and it's already so turnkey and so passive, why would I sell it anyway?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, it's imagine that you got to treat a business like a business, and watch every penny and lead the team and build the team. And it's just, despite what social media says, owning a business is not passive.
No. Yeah. And I mean, I'm having to vet those buyers because there's a bunch of them out there that think that that's the case. And so, I'm trying to vet that in our conversations too. Like, look, it sounds like what you're wanting is a passive investment. This is not. So this is not for you. This particular business. There may be some out there, again, they're unicorns.
Okay. So they're looking at this sim, they're modeling this out financially to understand, what's an appropriate purchase price. And then we're moving along the next step of making an offer. And so kind of walk me through that, with a listing, kind of the next steps. Is it getting in touch with the seller? Is it turning in an offer? Like what are really the next steps from I know what I can pay for it to getting an accepted offer?
Yeah. So the process is kind of fluid there. A lot of times the buyer is bouncing off of me, like sort of their ideas. Like, I'm thinking about getting a loan for this, and I think I got, 20% that I can come up with for the down payment. And, but I want the seller to stay on for 6 months to help me, transition this. And, I really would like the seller to have a little bit of skin in the game, and I want them to come up with 10% that they're going to seller finance to me. So that's getting back to your question, Kellen, earlier about how much do you need? That's why I was saying 10% is the bottom line, because a lot of times buyers will come up with 10% out of pocket. They'll get the seller to finance 10%, and then they'll get 80% from a lender as a loan. And so we're kind of like bouncing all of those things off of one another and like figuring out what is the best, fit. Some sellers are like, yeah, I've got a seller I just signed last week, and he said he would do up to 50% seller financing.
Wow.
That's great. Like that really helps a buyer get the deal done. I've got other sellers that are like, I don't want to finance any of this. Like I need this money because I am going to X after this. I'm going to move to North Carolina, and I have to have that to pay for my house or whatever. So it's very fluid. We're going back and forth trying to figure out, and I'm helping guide them through that process. And so once we have these kind of general terms together, at Transworld, we have a established, promulgated contract. It's called the business sale. Oh, it's called oh my gosh, I just forgot the name of it. It's the BSOAA, the Business Sale Offer and Acceptance Agreement.
Okay.
And so, anyways, it's a simple 4-page document that we've used on thousands of transactions. And so it's really well vetted in the state of Texas. And most people don't have a problem with it at all. So whenever it's a business, I think in the past podcasts, we've talked about the difference between like a Main Street business and an M&A size business in my world. A Main Street business is like more like under $2 million, and an M&A size business is over that. So in an M&A size business, that document that I'm describing, the contract, could be one that an attorney draws up. Some larger deals, like it's just
because it needs more customization.
More customization. There's more There's more to the business, whatever. But for most Main Street businesses, this document works. It's a 4-pager. It has like simple blanks to fill out. It's similar to a real estate contract. And so we're walking through that. We're figuring out the high level terms of that, the terms that I just went over. And once we have that, and we're feel good about, I'm also helping them, like, kind of moving them along, trying to get them towards, like, I think this is what the seller might accept, And so we get that, we present it to the seller, and the seller sees this offer and he's like, this looks great. Like, I want to sell my business. Let's do it. He signs it and we're on our way. That happens not often. Most of the time, the seller's going to say, well, I like this and this, but maybe we need to work on this. They offered way too low on the sales price. They're just fishing here. And so, whatever the terms that we came up with, maybe something needs to be tweaked a little bit. So I go back to the buyer and say, hey, this is so it's like negotiation, just like in a real estate transaction. And we're trying to figure out what is that middle ground that makes it work for everybody. And what does the buyer feel really good about, and what does the seller feel really good about, to get this transaction done.
At what point do the buyer and seller meet?
Oh, before that.
Okay. What describe that part?
So before this offer goes back and forth, sorry, I completely skipped a step there. Before that happens, so let's go back to the SIM. The buyer has reviewed the SIM. They want to buy the business. We've talked about it a little bit. I'm vetting the buyer. Now it's like, okay, we need to go look at this business. We need to meet with the seller. We need to, the buyer inevitably has tons of questions about the business. And so what we do is we schedule a buyer-seller meeting. And some sellers want that to happen, after business hours. And some
makes sense. Don't want to panic all their staff and everything.
Right. Some either don't really worry about that, or they have like a sort of a secluded place to talk and whatever. So we figure out how that's going to happen, and we meet, and I am there as kind of an intermediary, really, and helping move the conversation along and make sure that I can help interpret sometimes, buffer what the buyer is saying and buffer what the seller is saying, because everybody's passionate in this situation. So I'm just there to help move that along.
Yeah, that's there's a considerable amount of vetting of these buyers and kicking the tires and making sure that they're, they can perform and do what they say they're going to do prior to this buyer interview setup. Meeting is, you've spent a lot of time so that you're not wasting anybody's time. If it gets to that point, it's someone who's pretty serious. They're generally in the ballpark, of a purchase price that would make sense. And this is a meeting, just kind of put your eyes on, what does the business look like? What does the building look like? What does the equipment look like? And you're kind of, kicking the tires, so to speak. And so then after that, that's when you go back and they're going to put together that formal offer in that BSOAA. And then that's when it moves forward through that negotiation process.
Yeah. And I would add to that, in the meeting, or before getting to that meeting point, we really encourage, almost demand, that the buyer does not go to that business and secret shop it. They could go and secret shop it. Like, they can go in and act like a customer and sort of look at the business if it's appropriate. to do it that way. But, we ask it, don't go in and say, hey, I'm here because I hear this business is for sale.
Right.
And, that could just ruffle a lot of feathers. So
Yeah.
And
we want to be very confidential and discreet during that process.
Yes. And that's so much of the NDA process is setting those expectations and making sure, hey, we need to protect everybody in this. And you're signing this saying you're not going to run around town. You're not going to go run into their office. You're not going to do so many different things that we're getting that written and agreed upon before they're moving along.
That's right.
Okay. So we've gotten to a point where we've agreed on a purchase price. We've agreed to terms. We have a signed agreement. And then, do you just close the next day? What is that? What happens after that?
Yeah. So as soon as everybody's in agreement, of the contract, we get that contract to a closing company. We use one in our office specifically. And from the date that it's signed and executed, you have a period of time that's called the due diligence period, the DD.
All right.
And in that, our standard contract, it's 10 days. Is super typical.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's not much time.
It's not that long. But it could be, depending on the business and the needs, it could be extended. But basically, you've got most of the high level stuff. You've already met with the buyer. Like you've vetted it pretty good. And now it's like time to get down to the nitty gritty. And so, in the SIM, we include typically a financial snapshot, and it's like a spreadsheet that I've built out that reflects the financial statements or the tax returns in the past couple of years. But once you're in due diligence, then you get access to the actual tax returns in the history. So usually it's like 3 to 5 years is in backward history. Or financial statements like the profit and loss statements, a year-to-date profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, customer list, equipment list, detailed. If there's any contracts like MSAs or other contracts in the business. Anyway, just anything else that's like you're trying to prove that the numbers are what they say they are, and that you're buying what you think you're buying.
Mm-hmm.
That's your time to determine that. And so, yeah. So like I said, 10 days is pretty typical for a Main Street business.
If you're a buyer in some of these areas you just listed, it covers a lot of different, areas of expertise. Would you suggest that a buyer needs to put together a team of people to help them through that due diligence process? Like maybe a CPA and an attorney, or do you think it just depends on the business?
Absolutely depends.
Okay.
Depends on the business and it depends on the buyer. Some buyers have a high acuity in all of those areas and they're just competent and know what they're doing. Others are an expert at one thing and maybe it's not accounting and finance. And so, for most people, I would say it is very good. It's a very good idea to build a team around you in like you mentioned, a CPA, an attorney. And in some cases, maybe some kind of industry expert.
Yeah.
I think so. If everybody's getting their eyes on it, helping you, maybe even a financial advisor, if you've got one that, is advising you on your overall wealth and finance situation.
Sure.
So there's two scenarios here in due diligence. There's one that you get all this documentation that you comb through yourself and with your team, and you're verifying that the business is what you think it is. And scenario A, it's great. They have great documentation. This makes sense.
No surprises.
Yeah. No surprises. Like we're continuing to move forward past due diligence and let's go buy this deal. Scenario B is there's a surprise.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So when that happens, what what happens?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things that could happen. One is that it just blows the deal up. It's so big to the buyer that we can't move forward. And that can happen. Like that's okay. That's why you've gone through this due diligence period. And by the way, I didn't mention in the due diligence period, if the buyer decides to back out, they don't have to lose their earnest money, their earnest money deposit, their down payment that they put up, which we didn't really go over, but that's part of that offer is you have to have some kind of earnest money deposit. But if you back out during the due diligence, then you don't have to. You can get that back. So that's one option. The other is maybe it's just, hey, here's a surprise. But if you're willing to concede that is an issue, Mr. Seller, then maybe we come down on the sales price. Maybe it's something that's revenue driven or bottom line driven. Then maybe that's what it justifies. It is. Yeah, we are all in agreement. This is substantially different than what we thought. So because of that, we need to come down on the sales price. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it has to do with, the length of time that the seller is going to stay on or something. Like maybe they get in there and they're like, oh, I just realized that this requires a lot of information that is in the seller's head. Buying this business is basically buying what's in this seller's head. They're going to need to stay on a lot longer than 3 weeks in order for me to transition, successfully. And so maybe it's extending that time. So there's various ways, but basically in real estate, we call that a retrade. And basically it's like, yeah, we're coming back to the table and saying, hey, this is substantially different than what we thought when we made our offer. And because of that, we're changing our offer to this. Do you accept? And if everybody agrees, then you just move forward. If not, then you back out and find something else.
And your job and expertise as a broker is, you've done this several times and you kind of know the levers to pull whenever certain surprises arise that you can, if all parties are willing and able, you can help renegotiate during this portion and keep the deal together, keep the deal a win-win for everybody involved and continue progressing forward. And that is the expertise and problem solving that a broker brings to these highly animated, highly, passionate interactions.
Yeah, you're a buyer, you're about to spend X amount of money. That's probably a lot and a lot to you. On this business, and you've been vetting it and you're so excited and you're like, this is going to happen like this. I'm so excited about it and I'm so nervous about it. And then all of a sudden this thing comes up and you're like, okay, I'm done. Like if this is there, then what else is there? And so, yeah, you definitely, it's an emotional roller coaster in that process. And so that's what I'm there to do, is to help you see the facts, the truth, and the sort, find, what's take an emotional step back and see like what's actually happening here. And yeah, I'm there to guide through that process.
Well, and I would imagine it's so comforting and nice for somebody who's buying, especially if it's a first-time buyer, to have that experienced eye. Otherwise, like you said, I would imagine as a first-time buyer, if some surprise came up during due diligence, I'd be like, yeah, like you said, well, if they're hiding this, what else are they hiding? And I would imagine that having that calm presence that can say, well, I think this is probably the only hang up that we're going to run into, or yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there are a bunch of things we should worry about here. Just the benefit of that third party.
Yeah. And so much, I think more often than not, for sure, it's not someone hiding something. It's just you're looking, a little closer under a microscope, and to a potential buyer, it might be, the initial, gut reaction of like, oh my gosh, this is completely different. And then in reality, it's not. And it's your job as a broker to help, like you said, interpret that of, hey, these are the facts. This is what this means, in the big picture, in the grand scheme of things, and help discern through that process.
Yep.
And if a buyer wants to back out, but both sides can't agree about whether or not this new finding in the due diligence period was substantially different from what was originally discussed, is there a possibility that buyer will lose their earnest money if they back out?
Once the due diligence period is over, yes.
Okay.
But
during
it's
due
sort of
diligence.
like in a real estate, it's like when you're buying a house, so you have an option period typically.
Okay.
And in that option period, you can back out for any reason without.
So it doesn't depend on agreement between the buyer and seller on. Okay.
Okay. So we've moved past due diligence, and now, I mean, what's the next step? What's the next step to get to the closing table?
Yeah. So after that, it's there's a lot of different things that are going on. From the buyer's perspective, it's mainly if you have a lender, it's getting the loan approved and making sure that you're staying on top of getting the lender moving forward. Which means, you're typically for an SBA loan, you're having to develop a business plan and a pro forma, like what do you think the numbers are going to look like going forward, and getting them all of the lender, all of your financial statements, your tax returns and K1s, and all the things they need to do to vet you financially. And really, that's typically it's easier for the buyer to do than the lender. Like it just, the lender typically drags their feet on that because they're not, it's like they're waiting. They've got so many deals going that they're like in the initial stages of that, they're waiting until a deadline before they want to, get all of that information. And so my job is to help push the buyer to get that stuff in, to, weekly check-ins with them or even more, and make sure that they're moving that ball forward. Yeah, I mean, those are the biggest things. That on the seller side, you're trying to get the certificate of no tax due done, which is, I think we talked about that last episode. And then also on the buyer side, you're trying to get, the real estate piece figured out. So sometimes you're buying the real estate, and that's a little bit easier as far as like you're just buying it. It's not, you've already negotiated that with the seller. Versus if it's a lease, if the business is leasing a space, now there's a landlord involved, and you're having to get qualified by that landlord and either signing a new lease or assuming a lease. And so, moving that ball forward is also key. If there's any kind of like licenses that are needed to run this business, or certifications or anything like that, you got to work through that during this time as well as you get to the closing table. Introductions or, key contracts and key relationships with either vendors or customers. You're trying to get that all figured out so that to make sure that you can transition those smoothly at acquisition.
Yeah. So as a broker, you're helping quarterback through all of this, where you're basically, making sure you're communicating with the lender, making sure everything's in on time and on both sides, whether it's, the certificate of no tax due or, personal financial documents to the lender. You're helping keeping that train moving down the tracks on time, on budget, and, as detailed and, I's dotted and T's crossed as possible. And then ultimately, once all of that's done, then you close. And do you close at a title company? What does that look like? I guess my experience is at a title company with real estate, but what does that look like for a business?
Yeah. So the way that we're doing it right now with Transworld is we have a company that we use. They're based out of Dallas, called Lawyers Escrow, and they handle the closing. And so basically it's a virtual closing.
That's
so
nice.
It makes it really easy. I mean, I've had buyers and sellers before, like they feel like what you just said, they want to come somewhere, and I'm happy to host you at our office, and you can come and get on your phone and sign the documents on your phone in my office. But it's as simple as that. Once all the money is at the closing company and everything's signed, then it's done deal.
That's
Just
awesome.
take over. So, and takeover can happen a couple of different ways. I mean, it could just be like literally on that day you just take over the business, or it could be like we close this day, but we're going to take over on this day, and then obviously depending on how much the seller is going to be involved in the transition, you're going and you're having a meeting and telling the team and explaining that, hey, I'm the new owner and here's my goals and all of those things. And that's an emotional day for all as well.
Yeah. Okay. So big picture, we went through a lot, from someone reaching out to you, get a hold of Tanner, fill out a buyer questionnaire, kind of get pre-qualified for what the perfect business is for you, to then you go and help find that. And then they're signing an NDA. They're looking at a SIM. They're underwriting a business, understanding, what are the cash flows? What can I pay for this? Once you've vetted that a little bit and know it's a serious, that we're close on price, then we're setting up a buyer seller interview where we're going on site and talking through some details together. Then it is making an offer and negotiating an offer until one is ultimately accepted. Then we're going through due diligence where we're verifying everything financially, documentation wise, and otherwise within the business. We're verifying that. After that, we are getting approved for a loan. If we're going to use a loan, we're getting some documents from the seller, and then we're putting together our transition plan for when we take over. And then ultimately that brings us to the closing app online virtually that you're wiring in the funds and then signing over, and you are now the new proud owner of Business ABC. And so, did I miss any steps in that?
I mean, that's
high level. Obviously, there's so much nuance.
That's
to
the
that.
gist of it.
That's business buying 101. That's great, man. That's such a good overview for those interested in buying a business that kind of lay out the steps. And there's so much intricacy in each of those, but we have the experts on our team that we can help anyone navigate that process.
Yeah, I'll hold your hand through it.
You're good at that. Yeah. What would you, I mean, we're right at time. This is great. What would you add to that? What are some other, things that people need to know that maybe they don't as buyers walking into this? What's kind of some concluding thoughts on this?
I mean, look, I've said this on each of the episodes y'all have hosted me on, which, by the way, I'm so grateful that you guys have done this. This has been great for me. It's, why do you want to buy a business in West Texas and Eastern New Mexico? Like, why do you want to come here? You may be listening to this from, New York or Florida or wherever. I would just say that our communities in this area are very strong. We're very friendly. We're a friendly people. And it's a great place to raise a family. We have really strong morals and values here. And it's just reflected in the people. Like, the people here are so good. And you hear it all the time from, people that move here and that have never been here. That's what they say. It's the people. And so I just can't speak highly enough to, why would you want to come to Lubbock, Texas to buy a business? And really it's the people.
Yeah.
And
a business friendly environment.
Oh my gosh. Yes. We have, less regulation than most other places in the country, for sure. It's business friendly. The people are great. You can build you can grow your family here. You can build a family here as well, actually. So anyway, yeah, I just, if you haven't been here, just come visit and check us out. Like, see what we have to offer. There's great food, great entertainment, great weather for a lot of the year, really. Mm-hmm. It's understated how awesome our weather is. So, yeah, those are kind of my closing thoughts.
I love it. All right. And say it one more time for our listeners. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can call me direct. My number is 806-853-0833. My email is tnoble@tworld.com. And my website is tannernoble.com.
Awesome. Man, thank you so much for this series. I'm excited for it to come out. I know people are going to get a lot out of this.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thanks, Tanner.
Cheers.
All right. Well, what a great episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I learned a lot about the buying process. So if you're out there and you're thinking about buying a business, I don't know a better source of information than what you just got. So if you liked that episode, if you enjoyed the content that you got here, we'd invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can find us on any other platforms there, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd invite you to keep listening.
And if you are a business owner or business leader and you feel stuck in your business, you feel you can't work on your business, go to our website at www.stagcoaching.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, click to schedule a free consultation. And in our free consultation, we can either give you a free business valuation and tell you what your business is worth today and what it could potentially be worth in the future, given changing a few things. Or we can spend our consultation working on your number one issue that is negatively affecting our business. And in one meeting, you'll have some actionable steps to tackle your biggest problem. And so go to our website and schedule your free consultation. Again, it's www.stagcoaching.com. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.